It was past 2 a.m. at a lonely diner on Route 61. Truckers shuffled in, waitresses poured coffee, and no one noticed the boy in a coat waving his hands desperately into empty air. No one, except Grace Navarro. She signed back and unknowingly stepped into the world of a Mafia boss, his mute son, and a dangerous secret that could bring the whole empire down. What would you have done if you were in her place? The diner sat like a tired lantern in the endless dark of Route 61, its neon sign buzzing against the steady drone of diesel engines outside. Truckers drifted in and out, their boots dragging across linoleum floors, chasing caffeine before another long haul. It was past 2 in the morning when Grace Navarro pushed through the door, brushing rain from her coat. At 33, with sharp eyes and a posture shaped by long nights behind dispatch screens, she looked like someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. She carried the quiet weight of the road in her shoulders. Her job as a truck dispatcher kept her tethered to drivers across the Midwest, solving breakdowns, rerouting shipments, staying awake when the world slept. Tonight, she had decided to stop for coffee on her way to visit her brother's unit near Jefferson City. The storm had slowed traffic, and the diner, with its hum of fluorescent lights, felt like a small pocket of warmth. She slid into a booth, ordered black coffee, and let her eyes wander. That was when she noticed him. At first, he was just a boy in an expensive coat, sitting stiffly by the window. His dark hair fell neatly to one side, and the shine of his shoes looked wildly out of place against the scuffed tile. People walked past him without a glance. Waitresses refilling mugs, truckers digging quarters from their pockets for the jukebox. But the boy's hands moved in the air, sharp and deliberate, like a dancer no one was watching. Grace froze. She knew the language. American Sign Language had been her second tongue since childhood, the only way she could talk to her younger sister, Sophia, who had been born deaf. Years later, the rhythm of those gestures still lived in her bones. And here, in the middle of Missouri, a child was signing with desperation etched into every flick of his fingers. He wasn't just asking, he was pleading. Grace leaned forward, heart pounding. She signed back slowly, deliberately. "Are you okay?" The boy's hands stilled. His eyes widened, disbelieving. Then, in a rush, he signed back, clumsy, hurried, but unmistakable. "You see me?" She nodded with the faintest smile. Something shifted in his face, a flicker of relief breaking through the tension. His name, he signed quickly, was Matteo. The gestures were clumsy, uneven, but clear enough for Grace to follow. He was tired, hungry, and waiting. For whom, he wouldn't say. The waitress brought Grace her coffee, oblivious to the silent exchange unfolding at the corner booth. Around them, the world buzzed on, blind to the small miracle taking place under flickering neon. Grace asked gently if Matteo was lost. He shook his head violently, then glanced toward the window, where raindrops streaked the glass. His eyes kept darting to the door, as though expecting someone. And then they came. 2 black SUVs pulled into the gravel lot, engines humming low. The diner seemed to shrink as the doors opened and men in dark coats stepped out, their movements sharp, rehearsed. Grace felt her stomach twist. These weren't truckers. They weren't locals. The boy tensed in his seat, his hands frozen in mid-sign. The door swung open, and the men entered like shadows. The lead figure was tall, broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair slicked back and a stare that seemed to measure every corner of the room in a single glance. He moved with a calm that was more terrifying than anger. The boy stood. "Matteo," the man said, his voice deep, accented faintly with Italian roots. Relief, command, and something softer flickered in the single word. Grace's breath caught. She had heard stories whispered along trucking routes, rumors that floated in bars and way stations. Dante Calabrese. The name alone was enough to make seasoned drivers lower their voices. A man who held invisible strings from Kansas City to St. Louis, whose world lived in shadows where favors and debts bought silence. And the boy Matteo was his son. Dante's sharp eyes swept the diner, pausing when they landed on Grace. He studied her with unsettling precision, then shifted his gaze to Matteo. The boy's hands twitched with nervous signs, half hidden, as though caught between confession and secrecy. Grace instinctively signed back a small reassurance. Dante's jaw tightened. You understand him. It wasn't a question. Grace's throat dried. She nodded, too stunned to speak. She expected anger, suspicion, maybe even violence. Instead, Dante gestured to one of his men, who placed a heavy hand on Matteo's shoulder and guided him toward the door. Then Dante leaned closer to Grace's booth. You'll come with us, he said quietly, as if it were a foregone conclusion. You're the first one he has answered to in years. Grace felt the diner tilt. Around her, truckers kept eating pie. The jukebox crooned an old country song, and rain hammered against the windows. Her life had slipped off balance, and she knew it would never fall back into its old shape. She thought of Sophia, her sister, how fragile the line of communication had felt until the moment someone reached across it. She thought of Matteo's pleading hands, desperate for recognition. And she thought of the man standing before her, radiating a power that pressed against her chest like a weight. Every instinct screamed to run. Yet she also knew, if she walked out that door and left Matteo behind, she would never forgive herself. So Grace Navarro stood, pulled her coat tighter, and followed Dante Calabrese into the night. The rain swallowed them whole. The convoy moved like a shadow across the drenched highways, black SUVs cutting through the night without so much as a flicker of hesitation. Grace sat wedged between two men in the back seat, their suits stiff, their eyes as sharp as bayonets. Matteo sat across from her, his small hands folded tight in his lap, his gaze fixed on the blur of headlights streaking past. Every time their eyes met, he twitched his fingers in the smallest of signs: reassurance, gratitude, and a flicker of fear. The ride stretched long enough that Grace's nerves burned themselves raw. When the cars finally turned down a private road lined with wrought iron gates, she realized they weren't driving to some rented hideout. This was a fortress. The estate rose out of the dark like a citadel, all marble and stone, guarded by tall iron fences and men who looked carved from the same material. The gates parted without a sound, and the vehicles swept inside. Security cameras blinked overhead, their red lights slicing through the mist. Grace followed Matteo out of the SUV. The boy clung to her sleeve for half a second, just enough to remind her he trusted her more than anyone else in the place. Then Dante appeared at her side, his presence so heavy it seemed to pull the air tight around them. Inside, he said, the mansion swallowed her whole. Chandeliers glittered above polished floors, and the faint aroma of cigar smoke clung to the walls. But beneath the grandeur ran a current of unease, a silence too deliberate, as though the house itself held its breath. Men lined the hallways with military precision, their gazes following every step she took. Grace expected to be questioned, searched, maybe even threatened. Instead, Dante led her to a spacious study lined with dark shelves of leather-bound books and a fireplace that glowed with restless embers. Matteo hovered near her side, his small frame dwarfed by the heavy oak desk. Dante's voice broke the silence. You speak his language. Grace steadied her breath. American Sign Language. My sister is deaf. I grew up with it. Dante's sharp eyes flicked between her and Matteo. He never answers my men. Not his tutors, not his doctors. For years, nothing. But with you, his jaw clenched. With you, he speaks. Grace glanced at Matteo, who was fidgeting with the sleeve of his coat. She signed softly. Do you want to tell him something? The boy shook his head so fast his hair brushed his eyes. Then, with a furtive glance toward his father, he signed only two words: not safe. Grace's chest tightened. She looked at Dante, who hadn't caught the meaning, his gaze impatient. She weighed whether to translate and decided not to. Instead, she said carefully, he trusts me, that's all. Maybe you should let me keep teaching him. Dante studied her in silence, then gave a curt nod. You'll stay here, teach him, whatever it takes. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. But understand this, Miss Navarro. My son is not a curiosity. He is my blood. You protect him, or you won't leave these walls alive. Grace met his eyes. For all the menace in his words, There was something else buried deep: desperation. Fear. The look of a man who had built an empire but had no key to unlock his own child's silence. The days that followed blurred into a strange rhythm. Grace found herself a guest and a prisoner both. Guards trailed her everywhere, yet Matteo sought her out with unrelenting devotion. She began teaching him not just the rigid motions of textbook ASL, but softer signs. Happy, sad, scared, brave. She encouraged him to string emotions together, to give shape to feelings he had never voiced. And Matteo blossomed. His signs grew more fluid, his expressions sharper. He laughed once, a sound so sudden and unpolished that Grace nearly cried at hearing it. He signed stories about dreams, about colors he liked, about a bird he saw from his window. But sometimes his hands trembled with darker signs. One evening, while sketching letters in the air, he froze mid-motion. Then, slowly, he signed words Grace almost didn't want to piece together. His hands sketched fragments. A looming figure, the flash of a knife, a table stained in silence. His eyes darted to the door, then back to her, begging her to keep it hidden. Grace's breath hitched. Matteo had seen something. A murder, or worse, something that lived in the shadows of his father's empire. His muteness wasn't just congenital. It was survival. That night, she lay awake in the guest room assigned to her, staring at the ornate ceiling, the weight of the mansion pressing down on her. She thought of Sophia, her sister, how dangerous the world could be when you were denied a voice. And she thought of Matteo, a boy who wanted nothing more than to be understood, yet carried a secret that could fracture the walls around him. The next morning, as she entered the study, Dante was waiting. He looked exhausted, as though he hadn't slept. Papers were spread across his desk, but his attention snapped to her the moment she walked in. "What is he telling you?" Dante demanded. Grace's chest tightened, but she smoothed her features into calm, hiding the storm building underneath. "He's learning words, feelings, that's all." Dante leaned in close, his voice low and dangerous. "If there is something he knows, something he saw, you will tell me. My world is full of men who smile with knives behind their backs. And if Matteo has seen one of them—" He trailed off, the rest left unsaid, more threatening in silence than in words. Grace nodded, though her mind churned. Matteo's secret wasn't safe here, not even with his own father. Later that day, while walking with Matteo through the garden, she taught him something new: a code. Simple signs that could look like innocent gestures to others, but to them carried hidden meaning. Danger. Hide. Trust me. Matteo repeated the signals until they flowed from his hands without thought. And when he looked at her again, the fear was still there, but threaded through it was a fragile hope. The marble walls posed as armor, but inside them something fragile and defiant was taking shape, a bond beyond Dante's command and his rival's reach. And Grace Navarro knew. The boy's silence was not weakness. It was the single thread holding the truth together. The storm rolled in without warning, a wall of thunder pressing down on the Missouri plains. The Calabrese estate, usually humming with the steady rhythm of guards and polished routines, bristled like a fortress under siege. Grace sensed the change the moment she walked into Matteo's room that evening. The boy was pacing, his small fists tight at his sides. When he saw her, his hands burst into motion. "Bad men here. Danger." Her pulse spiked. She had taught him that signal only days earlier, their private code. She crossed the room quickly, crouching in front of him. "Where?" He hesitated, then pointed toward the window. Beyond the manicured gardens and stone walls, Grace caught the faint glint of headlights moving where there should have been none. Before she could react, the mansion erupted. Shouts echoed through the halls, the heavy thud of boots against marble floors. Doors slammed, radios crackled. Grace pulled Matteo close, trying to block out the chaos. The boy shook with terror, but his eyes stayed locked on hers, waiting for direction. The door burst open. Two men stormed inside, dressed not in the tailored suits of Dante's loyal guards but in dark, unmarked clothes. Their guns gleamed under the chandelier's light. One barked, "Take the kid!" Grace threw herself in front of Matteo, arms spread wide. "He's just a boy." The larger man shoved her hard, sending her sprawling into the desk. Pain jolted through her ribs. Matteo screamed without sound, his hands flailing in panic signs. The smaller man grabbed him, clamping a hand over his mouth though no sound could escape. Within seconds, they vanished into the hall, leaving Grace gasping for breath. She staggered to her feet, heart hammering. She could hear Dante's voice roaring somewhere in the mansion, men answering with gunfire and shouts. But Grace didn't wait for orders. She bolted down the corridor, chasing the faint trail Matteo had left behind. Their code. At the corner of a hallway, she saw it. A knocked-over vase, lying just where his hand could have brushed it. Clue, she thought. Not random. Deliberate. She sprinted onward, following small markers. A door left ajar. A light switch flicked down when the rest were up. Matteo was leaving her a path. By the time she reached the service entrance, the storm outside was in full fury. Rain lashed against her face as she burst out into the night. The sound of engines revved in the distance. Not the heavy purr of Dante's SUVs, but something smaller, rougher. Grace scanned the grounds, adrenaline sharpening her focus. And then she saw it. Faint impressions in the mud, small scuffs spaced unevenly, like the marks of someone dragged while resisting. They led toward the back fence, where a section hung slightly ajar. She didn't think. She climbed through, mud soaking her jeans, and stumbled onto the open road beyond. The road vanished into darkness, slashed open now and then by lightning carving white scars across the sky. She spotted fresh tire tracks carving into the wet gravel, heading south toward the highway. She memorized the direction, her dispatcher's brain calculating instinctively. If they wanted to vanish quickly, they wouldn't risk the interstates. They'd take the back routes, old trucking paths, forgotten way stations, places that didn't exist on tourist maps. Grace wiped rain from her eyes, her mind racing. She had once spent nights tracking convoys across these same highways. She knew the back roads better than most of the men chasing Matteo now. And she knew one place that fit too perfectly. An abandoned way station 20 miles south, left to rot since the state shut it down a decade ago. It was a perfect hideout. She didn't waste time convincing Dante's men. They were scrambling, loading weapons, shouting into radios. She slipped past them, heart set on one thing, reaching Matteo before his silence became permanent. Grace commandeered a beat-up Ford pickup from the estate's side lot, the kind of vehicle workers used for hauling supplies. The engine coughed, then roared. She sped out into the storm, following the invisible thread Matteo had left her. The drive was treacherous, rain hammering so hard it blurred the world into streaks of silver. She clung to the wheel until her fingers ached. Her body coiled tight as the truck shuddered through the storm. She thought of Matteo's trembling signs, the trust in his eyes, the fragile bond they'd built inside those marble walls. She couldn't fail him. At a crossroads, a flash of lightning revealed something in the distance. A scrap of cloth snagged on a barbed wire fence. She braked hard, splashing mud across the windshield. The dark blue fabric caught the light, its faint embroidery glistening in the storm. Matteo's coat, not dropped, but placed, a beacon for her to find. Her chest tightened with fierce pride. The boy wasn't just surviving, he was fighting, using everything she'd taught him. She pressed on, tires hissing against flooded pavement. With every mile, the storm deepened, until the sky itself seemed to split with the weight of thunder. Finally, the shape of the way station rose from the dark, a hulking shadow of concrete and rusted steel, abandoned but not lifeless tonight. Faint lights flickered inside, shadows moving where no one should have been. Grace killed the truck's engine and let the silence wrap around her. She slipped from the cab, rain pelting her skin, and crouched low behind a crumbling sign. Somewhere inside that building was Matteo. Somewhere in the storm of betrayal and violence, a child's small hands were still signing for help. And Grace Navarro knew she was the only one who could hear him. The abandoned way station loomed like a ghost of the old highways. Concrete cracked, steel beams rusted, windows shattered and black with rain. Grace crouched behind the sign, her breath shallow, watching the faint glow of lanterns leaking through broken glass. The storm raged on, thunder swallowing the sound of her footsteps as she crept closer. Inside, shadows shifted. She counted at least 4 men, their outlines pacing, their voices carried in harsh fragments through the night wind. But she wasn't listening for them. She was listening for Matteo. Her heart stuttered when she saw him. The boy was huddled near a steel pillar, wrists bound, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. Even in the dim light, she could see the terror in his eyes. But when his gaze darted toward the broken window and caught hers, his fingers twitched. The signs were quick, almost imperceptible, but Grace understood. Hide. Gun here. He shifted his chin toward the crate near his captor. Trust me. Grace's throat tightened. Matteo wasn't just surviving, he was guiding her. The very code she had taught him in secret was now their lifeline. She slid back into the shadows, heart pounding. She had no weapon, no reinforcements. Dante's soldiers were miles behind, still scrambling after false leads. But she had Matteo, his eyes, his hands, his courage. A plan formed. She slipped along the side of the building, rain masking her movements. Through another crack in the wall, she watched the men. One argued with another, shouting about the boss finally getting what's coming. A coup. Matteo had witnessed more than just blood. He had seen betrayal close enough to cut. Grace tapped on the wall 3 short knocks. It was the signal she had drilled into him for ready. Matteo sat straighter, his hands trembling as he signed back across the dim light. Go left. Loud noise. I run. She bit her lip. It was reckless. He was only a child, but he was the only one who knew where the cracks in their captor's attention lay. Grace scanned the ground and spotted a rusted oil drum half buried in mud. With a heave, she shoved it against the concrete, the clang echoing like thunder through the hollow station. Shouts erupted inside. 2 men ran toward the noise, rifles raised. Matteo moved. He kicked the crate beside him, sending it toppling. A pistol clattered across the floor. The 3rd man lunged for it, but Matteo rolled away, his small frame darting toward the shadows. Grace burst through the side door, adrenaline surging. Matteo! She shouted, the storm swallowing her voice. She signed desperately. Run to me. He bolted, legs pumping, eyes locked on hers. The 4th man caught sight of him and raised his weapon. Grace grabbed the fallen pistol from the floor, the metal cold and foreign in her hands. She had never fired in combat, but her brother had drilled her once, years ago, in case she ever needed it. The shot cracked like lightning. The man's gun flew from his grip, clattering into the dark. Grace didn't wait. She scooped Matteo into her arms, his body trembling but alive. The remaining men regrouped, fury etched on their faces. But before they could advance, headlights cut through the storm. Black SUVs roared into the lot, Dante's men spilling out with ruthless precision. Gunfire erupted, thunder answering in kind. Dante himself stepped into the chaos, his coat whipping in the wind, eyes blazing as he scanned the station. When he saw Grace clutching Matteo, something broke in his expression. For once, the mask slipped, and behind it stood not the boss, but a father stripped bare. The firefight ended quickly, the coup crushed under the weight of Calabrese loyalty. The traitors lay bound in the mud as the storm began to thin. Inside the shattered station, Grace sat on the floor, holding Matteo close. His hands moved frantically. You came. You saved me. She smiled through tears, signing back. We saved each other. Dante approached slowly, his imposing figure diminished by the sight of his son alive in Grace's arms. He crouched, reaching for Matteo. But the boy didn't move into his father's embrace. Instead, he lifted his trembling hands, eyes brimming, and signed one word with deliberate care. Mom. The moment stretched so taut it seemed the storm itself had paused to watch. Dante's breath hitched, his jaw tightening as he blinked hard against the sting in his eyes. The feared man of shadows, the boss whispered about across the Midwest, could not hide the tears that spilled down his weathered face. Grace's throat closed. She looked at Matteo, then at Dante, unsure what to say. But she didn't need words. The boy had said it all. Dante bowed his head, no longer the king among men, but a father undone by a language beyond his power. By dawn, the storm was gone. The way station stood broken, but something stronger had been built in its ruins. Trust. Grace and Matteo sat side by side in the back of the SUV, his small hand gripping hers, refusing to let go. The Calabrese fortress would never be the same, not because of bullets or blood, but because one woman had seen a forgotten child and dared to answer him. And as the sun cracked over the horizon, painting the wet roads in gold, Grace knew this wasn't just Matteo's rescue. It was the beginning of a new language, one that could topple walls thicker than stone. This story reminds us how a single act of kindness can ripple into something far greater, even piercing the walls of fear and power. If you were Grace, would you have stepped into that world for Matteo's sake? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this journey moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to embrace the journey for more stories that touch the heart and challenge the soul. See you in the next video.